This is Today As It Happened. Good Thursday evening. I'm Holly Furfer. I'm here to guide you through our timeline of the day's most important news, from a plane crash off the coast of Florida to Vice President J.D. Vance's crackdown on fraud in federal health programs. But first, we started the morning off with a look at day 2 of President Trump's visit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. President Trump was the guest of honor at a banquet hosted by Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier today in China. The two leaders started the day with a ceremonial greeting, a closed-door bilateral meeting, and then a visit to the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. Scripps News Chief Washington Correspondent Joe St. George joins us now live from Capitol Hill. And Joe, a busy day for the president for sure. And he's doing his best to stress the friendly relationship he claims the two have. But it seems President Xi was a bit more businesslike. What was your take on what you saw yesterday in China?
Well, the president has called it a, quote, fantastic day. The president invited Xi Jinping to the White House on September 24th for a reciprocal visit. Clearly an effort by the two leaders to tell the world that despite all of the policy disagreements and the policy clashes over the years, that the two big superpowers are capable of a warm-ish relationship.
An American president meeting the leader of China in person on Chinese soil. The first such gathering since President Trump last did it in 2017. China rolling out the red carpet for President Trump with an elaborate welcome ceremony ahead of in-person talks.
It's great.
Did you talk about Taiwan?
Great place. Incredible. China's beautiful.
Inside, during a meeting that lasted around 2 hours, much more formal discussions on the biggest issues of our time, with a look toward areas where the U.S. and China may find agreement.
We've had a fantastic relationship. We've gotten along. When there were difficulties, we worked it out. I would call you, and you would call me, and whenever we had a problem, you're a great leader. I say it to everybody, you're a great leader. Sometimes people don't like me saying it, but I say it anyway because it's true.
Can we, in the interests of the well-being of our two peoples and the future of humanity, build a brighter future together for our bilateral relations? These are the questions vital to history, to the world, and to the people.
Already, President Xi bringing up the issue of Taiwan. Taiwan is self-ruled, but China believes it is their province. The U.S. has given billions to Taiwan's military in recent years, despite officially not supporting Taiwan's independence, and amid strategic ambiguity as to how the U.S. might respond if it was ever invaded by China. According to a Chinese government spokesman, President Xi stressed to President Trump that the Taiwan question is the most important issue in China-U.S. relations. If it is handled properly, the bilateral relationship will enjoy overall stability. Otherwise, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. Other issues like trade and the Iran war are dominating discussions between the two leaders as well, with all eyes on what may or may not be announced before President Trump's departure.
President Xi Jinping also announcing that he wants a strategic partnership, more of a formal relationship established to look for extended areas of agreement between the two countries, particularly around technology. And Holly, remember who's been traveling with the president to Beijing? The CEO of NVIDIA, leaders from Apple, Elon Musk, Tesla. This is very much a meeting, not just between the U.S. and China, but also between U.S. tech leaders and China.
Yeah, and that's something that the U.S. wanted to focus on, but it was clear from those statements and the debrief after the meeting that China really wants to focus on Taiwan. Talk a little bit more, if you would, about that, because the U.S. Didn't say anything about that.
A really good point. The White House provided what's known as a readout to reporters like you and me who are not in the travel pool traveling with the president. A readout's really an executive summary of what happened behind the scenes when cameras and reporters aren't even allowed in those discussions. And the U.S. didn't even mention the word Taiwan in the official response. Meanwhile, the Chinese government, the Chinese spokesman made a point, as we said in that piece there, to point out that President Xi Jinping did warn the president that Taiwan, a country of 23 million people, could be a great source of conflict down the road. The U.S. since 1979 has had a policy of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan as to what would happen if China would ever invade the country. Even officially, the position is the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. Now, I spoke with an expert earlier this week who said if Xi Jinping could get President Trump to say he opposes Taiwan independence, that subtle tomato change that would almost sound like to you and me would be massive when it comes to China and Taiwanese relations. The U.S. has given billions of dollars to Taiwan in recent years for arms sales, a source of friction. Clearly a big point of discussion on this Thursday. And then to Iran, which is, let's face it, it is the global story of the moment. The White House did provide a summary as to what the two leaders discussed on that. The two sides agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy. President Xi also made clear China's opposition to the militarization of the strait and any effort to charge a toll. And according to the White House, expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the strait in the future. According to the White House readout, both sides agreed that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. So there is what we're seeing in public, which is meant to be pomp and circumstance and show the world they're together. But again, clearly areas of friction behind the scenes, Holly.
And Joe, going further into the question of Iran, I mean, you know, China is very reliant out of their energy coming out of the Persian Gulf. And China has a relationship with Iran. Did President Trump, or do we know if the U.S. put any kind of pressure on China to sort of intervene and maybe talk to Iran about opening the strait at this point?
That is something where we'll have to wait to hear more from the president on, right? It's been a lot of toasts. It's been a lot of quick mentions, quick summaries, very carefully worded statements by the president. But what will he tell reporters perhaps on that long flight back to the United States once he's off Chinese soil? I think that's part of the story that we'll have to be watching very closely as well. How much pressure does President Trump want to put on? Did he exert a lot of pressure, an attempt to persuade Xi Jinping maybe to do more? You're right. Just in the last several days, Iran's foreign minister met with leaders in China. China receives 40, 50, 60% of their oil from the Strait of Hormuz. They are deeply impacted by what's going on in the Middle East, more so than the United States right now. Does this result in some grand deal? Again, one of the big question marks as we continue to cover and follow the president's big trip to Beijing.
A couple other questions I have, since we have a minute or two left. The other war still going on, which seems to be overshadowed by the Iran war still happening, is Russia and Ukraine. We know that China is closely aligned with Russia. Do we know if there was any talk about ending that war, or China getting involved to try to put an end to that and come to some sort of an agreement there?
Again, Holly, these are the biggest issues of our time. I mean, you do not have a meeting between the leaders of the two superpowers without discussing the biggest issues of our time: the economy, technology, Iran, Ukraine, and Russia, of course, is a great strain. But what will be produced out of this? Again, we're not privy to that at this moment. We have the official readouts. We have what the spokesmen have been told to share with us. We'll have to wait for those off-the-cuff, unscripted press conferences with President Trump to get I think, the significant news on this front. As a sign of just how much respect President Trump has shown Xi Jinping on this trip during the state banquet, he even, during the toast, he even sipped from the champagne glass. And I note that as noteworthy because the president doesn't drink. He's famously not a drinker, doesn't do it because of how alcoholism has plagued his family over the years, but as a sign of respect for Xi Jinping, he didn't want to give a toast and not sip, which would be against traditional decorum. So again, a fascinating display that we've been sharing the pictures with you all morning here on Morning Rush of what's unfolding so far away yet so close to home here in Beijing.
This is Today As It Happened. We'll be right back. All All right, why don't we take a quick look at some of the other major headlines from today. And gas prices ticked up again overnight to $4.53 a gallon. That's 42 cents higher than 1 month ago. Economists say the war in Iran is behind the surge in prices. President Trump has floated the idea of suspending the federal gas tax, saving you 18 cents per gallon. But Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer says that's just not good enough.
Look, Americans need real relief. 18 cents isn't enough. If Trump wants to give real relief to Americans, end the damn war, that's $1.50. It's a lot more than 18 cents.
Another Trump administration official is out. Rich Danker, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s chief spokesperson, is resigning. He cited irreconcilable differences over flavored e-cigarettes that he says could cause children to become addicted. Danker left his role a day after FDA Commissioner Marty McCary officially stepped down for the exact same reason. And the Trump administration has had a list of firings and resignations in the last few months. And right now, the Surgeon General, the CDC director, and FDA commissioner are all among the vacant roles.
1 year after President Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on some imported auto parts, consumers are continuing to feel the pinch and paying more for repairs and part replacements than they did a year ago. 1 year into President Trump's tariffs on imported auto parts, and the cost of keeping cars in shape is continuing to climb. In May last year, the White House imposed a 25% tariff on some key foreign-made auto parts, a levy that is still in effect. The White House hoped the tariffs would spur auto companies to produce more cars domestically, but even American-made cars source many of their parts from other countries. Auto mechanic Jeff Landrum spoke with the Scripps News Group last year.
We got filters, we got wiper blades, we've got some brake parts, definitely tires. A lot of things that we use on a daily basis are from out of the country.
New data out Tuesday shows the price of car parts and equipment was up 3.8% in April compared to a year ago. And a new analysis from Anderson Economic Group found importers paid more than $3.5 billion in tariffs on auto parts last year from Canada and Mexico alone. Prior to the tariff, many parts were exempt. All that means it's getting pricier to fix your car.
Cost of repairs has certainly gone up.
The cost of vehicle maintenance and repair is up more than 5% from a year ago. While some American automakers announced plans to reshore some of their production, many car parts likely will never be made in the U.S., says Sam Fiorani, the vice president at research firm Auto Forecast Solutions.
Because the automotive parts suppliers have become so specialized, it makes more sense to make certain parts in other countries. So bringing it to the U.S. will either not happen, or it'll cost a lot of money to do it.
He says eventually the price of auto parts will level off, but it's unlikely they'll go down to pre-tariff levels.
The new tariffs will reposition the pricing, and consumers will just have to understand that's the new normal.
Separately, President Trump said he'll increase tariffs on imported cars and trucks from the European Union if the EU doesn't reach a trade deal by July 4th. Stephanie Liebergen, Scripps News Group.
A Utah mother who poisoned her husband with fentanyl, then wrote a children's book about grief, will spend the rest of her life in prison. A judge sentenced Corey Richens to life without parole on Wednesday, saying she is, quote, simply too dangerous to ever be free. Richens was convicted in March of lacing her husband Eric's drink with 5 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in 2022. Prosecutors say she was millions in debt and had secretly taken out life insurance policies on him. Her 3 sons told the court they would feel unsafe if their mother were ever released. A well-known and controversial live streamer known for posting videos with racial slurs is in custody after a shooting outside a Tennessee courthouse. Police say Dalton Etherly, who goes by the name Chud the Builder online, got into a confrontation with another man and shots were fired. Both men were hit and are hospitalized in stable condition. Now, it's unclear who fired the shots, but the district attorney says Etherly is a suspect. And the shooting happened just days after Etherly was arrested on separate charges following an incident at a Nashville restaurant. Vice President J.D. Vance is taking new steps to crack down on fraud in federal health programs. The Trump administration is deferring $1.3 billion in Medicaid funding to California. It's also imposing a 6-month freeze on some new Medicare enrollments. Vance says taxpayers and program beneficiaries are both hurt when fraudsters take money meant for low-income people who need health care. States are being warned to investigate Medicaid fraud or risk losing their funding. And all 11 people aboard a small plane that crashed into the Atlantic Ocean off Florida have been rescued. The Beechcraft King Air took off from the Bahamas before going down in the water. Survivors spent 5 hours in a life raft before rescue teams spotted them. The U.S. Coast Guard and Air Force responded, including a crew that happened to be on a training mission nearby. All 11 survivors were flown to Melbourne, Florida, and taken to a hospital, but the cause of the crash is now under investigation. We'll be back in just a moment as we continue tracking today's top news. Stay with us. Welcome back to Today's It Happened. All right, why don't we return to our briefing of today's top stories? A new survey finds menopause is taking a major toll on women in the workplace, and most employers are not helping. Nearly 90% of women surveyed say at least one menopause symptom has affected their work. 68% say they lose up to 10 hours of productivity each week. And nearly 20% say they quit a job or retired early because of their symptoms. The survey of more than 1,000 women found most avoid asking for help because menopause is not recognized in workplace policy. But hopefully that is about to change. Actress, TV personality, and spokesperson Brooke Burke has joined the menopause time off movement to call on employers to acknowledge this health issue and act. And she joins us now from her home in California. Welcome to Scripps News. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So, Brooke, we know women's health has always taken a back burner, but now we're finally beginning to talk about the unique issues that women face. So why is menopause chief among those issues?
Well, it's something that women have been dealing with and suffering silently for so many years. And this partnership that I have with Hone Health is so important because they've created, really it's an initiative, an entire actionable ecosystem called MTO, Menopause Time Off, to encourage employers to get behind their employees and to add a toolkit to their HR policies so that they can start offering more considerate and flexible accommodations. This study that you were just talking about, we learned that women the ages of 30 to 60, over 1,000 women we did the study on, 62% of them said that their symptoms actually affect their earnings, and 1 out of 5 had to retire or leave the workplace. So there's so much that can be done in the world of menopause, and we're hoping that people are going to get behind this movement, sign the declaration, and start creating change so that we can create a dialogue, so that we can give words to the symptoms that women are going through and create a stigma-free environment. And I think that's where we're headed right now, and it's so important. I've been through it myself. I'm on the other side of it, but I'm really honored to partner with Hone Health and to push this through.
And you mentioned that survey. It also found that nearly 90% of women say menopause symptoms affect their work. So why do you think employers have been so slow to respond to this? And how do you think this menopause time off movement is going to help?
I think that women have not been speaking out loud about this. I think they have been suffering silently, and I think that they haven't had a dialogue to really coincide with the symptoms that they've been dealing with, but not necessarily managing at high capacity. So Hone Health is offering a treatment plan for all of this and really shedding light and hoping to raise awareness to empower employers to find a more considerate way of managing and supporting women going through this challenging time.
And we know symptoms many women report: brain fog, insomnia, anxiety, exhaustion. I mean, these are all symptoms people can't see. It's not so obvious. So how do you think this is misunderstood, this whole experience?
I think that we've been groomed in a society to just deal with it. I think we haven't given words to a lot of these symptoms. So I think that many women don't have a supportive space, and that's what we're hoping to do, is to really offer this toolkit that can be added into their HR policy. So it creates a sort of comfort zone for women going through this. And we want everyone to show up at high capacity in the workplace, right? So when these symptoms are affecting your ability to do your job to the best of your ability, that creates a whole nother wave of issues. So we're asking people to get behind this. All of the information is at the Home Health MTO Hub. We want people to sign the declaration and just start raising awareness so that we can start creating change. And I think that once we do that, it really changes the ecosystem in the workplace so that women can start managing this at a much higher capacity.
Absolutely. And you know, unfortunately, reality is that there will be those that say, you know what, suck it up. Men don't have to take time off. And furthermore, it's going to negatively disrupt businesses. So what's the response to that attitude?
You know, once you hear this and once we empower the employees with this toolkit, I think they're going to be able to better manage it, because they're going to be more aware and more educated. So we have to give it a dialogue. We have to start talking about it. We have to create stigma-free dialogue so that there's a comfort level there. And I think that's where change takes place. And it's time. And when that conversation starts happening, everybody changes.
More of today's top stories just ahead on Today As It Happened. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. This is Scripps News' end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories, things you might have missed. So let's pick up right where we left off. On Wednesday, the Senate unanimously voted to approve a bill to suspend senators' pay during a government shutdown. Now, this follows the longest government shutdown left other federal workers unpaid for months. Scripps News senior congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed joins us now live from Capitol Hill. All right, Nate, they were talking about this for a while. So what's the significance of the vote?
Well, just in the last couple moments, the Senate unanimously passed that bill. It got final approval in the Senate all the way through. Now, every time that there is a government shutdown, senators will have their pay withheld, much like many of the federal workers who had their pay withheld over the longest government shutdowns in American history that we saw earlier this year with the Department of Homeland Security and last year with pretty much all of the federal government. So what this means, largely a messaging move by senators here to try and make clear that they want to show that they are subject to the same pain as many of the federal workers who they're here legislating for during those government shutdowns. This is kind of an artificial measure, so to speak, Holly. They will still get back pay, much like all of the federal workers who are guaranteed back pay under previous laws. But at the same time, during a government shutdown, senators will not actively be getting paychecks. And that was an area of strong contention during the previous government shutdowns. The fact that senators were able to really come and go from Washington as they pleased while still getting their paychecks, even though federal employees were not getting their paychecks. Republicans and Democrats saying they believe this bill, just good legislation in a way that Democrats and Republicans have been able to reach across the aisle. Again, one of the few opportunities they've had to do so in this past year. Take a listen. It's so rare to see bipartisanship in Washington these days. Why do you think pretty much all 100 senators are okay with this?
Yeah, again, because, you know, we got to get past these shutdowns. Anything along these lines that help us not only not have shutdowns, but get back to the regular appropriating process. That's what works best for the people, because that's how we look at every individual appropriation bill. We determine, you know, what's meritorious, what's not. You run them across the floor so everybody gets a shot at them, and you can really determine what should be funded and what shouldn't. And that also will help us reduce spending and do a better job on the debt and the deficit.
And again, the goal here to make sure that senators, Republican or Democrat, are subject to the exact same limitations as federal workers, that if the government is shut down, they will not get paid. Certainly it'll be interesting to see the impact of this, if this really has any policy impact. Now that it has passed the Senate, the next time there's a government shutdown, the soonest that could happen, by the way, Holly, not to say the clock has already started, that would be September 30th, October 1st. That is when the current tranche of government funding is set to expire.
Which will be here before we know it. All right, so I guess you could say one down, one to go. The bill just covers the Senate. So does this mean the House might follow suit, or might there be more problems there?
At this point, it's not clear that the House will follow suit. There's a number of proposals from both sides of the aisle to try and limit members' pay in the House of Representatives during a government shutdown. These are proposals that seem to perennially pop up every time there is a government shutdown. Then they lose momentum. What's so interesting about this latest push through the Senate, which was led by Senator John Kennedy, the Republican from Louisiana, is the fact that it kept the momentum up, that senators were able to take this vote in it, that they did not lose their eye. Their eye did not come off the ball, so to speak, despite the fact that the government shutdowns of this fiscal year are now behind us. So it'll be interesting to see if the House of Representatives follows through. Certainly this momentum from the Senate. It'll be interesting to see if Speaker Johnson decides to put those on the floor. He has large, broad authority over what bills get a vote in the House and what bills don't.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is fighting to keep his job. His health secretary resigned Thursday, saying Starmer's government has no vision and no direction. The move is seen as the first step in a challenge to Starmer's leadership. Former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner also cleared the way to join any leadership race. Starmer is vowing to stay in office, pointing to new economic data showing the British economy is growing. Pope Leo XIV is warning that artificial intelligence is making war more inhumane. Speaking at Rome's La Sapienza University on Thursday, the Pope said conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, and Lebanon show how dangerous the link between war and new technology has become. He called on students and researchers to use their work to support life and peace instead. The World Cup final is going to be a show on and off the field. FIFA announced Thursday that Shakira, Madonna, and K-pop superstars BTS will headline the first ever World Cup halftime show. The final is set for July 19th at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, and the tournament kicks off June 11th in Mexico City. You're watching Today As It Happened. We'll be back shortly, promise.
Scripps News is streaming for free on all your favorite streaming services. Once you get the app, get free access to breaking news, live events, and the award-winning journalism you expect from Scripps News. Start streaming Scripps News today.
So glad you're back here with Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Why don't we continue our walkthrough of the day's top headlines?
China's president issues a stark warning to President Trump. I'm Del Walters in Washington. You're watching Scripps News on the scene. President Xi warning that any mishandling of Taiwan could lead to clashes or even conflict between the two countries. President Trump continues his multi-day visit to China today. This all comes as the war in Iran persists, along with growing American dissent for that war. Scripps News White House correspondent Jacob Garden-Schwartz is tracking all of the developments. And Jacob, the first day of meetings between the world's two most powerful countries is over. Taiwan seems to be the headline so far. What are some of the other key takeaways that are being talked about?
Hey, good afternoon, Del. Well, certainly a lot of attention paid to this trip, of course, originally scheduled for earlier this year, but delayed due to the outbreak of the Iran conflict. So far, however, it seems that the focus of the conversations between the leaders has really been more about the broader U.S.-China relationship than it has been on the crisis in the Middle East. During President Trump's first full day in China, we saw a lot of pomp and circumstance, meetings at the Chinese capital, a visit to the Temple of Heaven, a state banquet in the evening, but the substantive conversations between the leaders happening primarily behind closed doors. Now, we do have readouts from both nations, and they say that the leaders discussed a number of different issues: trade, increasing business cooperation, Ukraine, the Korean Peninsula, and, as you mentioned, Taiwan. The Chinese leader saying the issue of Taiwan is the most important issue in the U.S.-China relationship. China's foreign ministry releasing a statement, a readout of the conversation, warning that if the Taiwan issue is, quote, handled properly, the bilateral relationship will enjoy stability. Otherwise, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in jeopardy. Now, of course, one concern about the president's trip to China and the Taiwan issue specifically concerns, whether the U.S. might change its policy to Taiwan, its longstanding policy opposing Chinese intervention there, supporting, Taiwan with arms sales and whatnot. We did hear from Secretary of State Marco Rubio in an interview earlier this morning, suggesting U.S. policy on Taiwan has not changed. Listen.
Anything that would compel or force a change in what we have now would be problematic. And we would certainly, our policies on that have not changed. It's been pretty consistent across multiple presidential administrations and remains consistent now. We think it would be a terrible mistake to force that through force or anything of that nature. There would be repercussions for that globally, not just from the United States. And we kind of leave it there.
Secretary of State indicating no change in U.S. policy, certainly a welcome relief both for Taiwan and bipartisan lawmakers who just last year approved a record $11 billion arms sale package to the nation. Otherwise, relatively minimal in terms of concrete takeaways so far, certainly watching to see what happens tomorrow when the leaders endure a number of other commitments. But so far, a number of jovial exclamations, suggestions of business relationships, no significant developments as it comes to Taiwan, at least on the American side, or, of course, the Iran conflict. Del?
Jacob, though, good news for American consumers because Iran actually did come up. At least that's what the president is telling Sean Hannity of Fox News.
That's right. We know that the issue did come up. How much emphasis, how much it was discussed, really depends on which side you ask. The Chinese readout not mentioning Iran by name, suggesting only that, quote, the Middle East was a topic of discussions. The White House, for its part, putting out a much more fulsome statement, saying that the nations agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy. President Xi also made clear China's opposition to the militarization of the strait, and he expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the strait in the future. That's, again, what the White House said in a public statement. But President Trump indicating that perhaps, China may not be making at least an immediate move away from its, ongoing purchase of Iranian oil. China remains the largest purchaser of Iranian oil around the globe. As you noted just a few moments ago, we heard some first bites from the president's conversations with Fox News' Sean Hannity about that conversation on Iran. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We discussed it. When you say support, they're not fighting a war with us or anything. No. He said he's not going to give military equipment. That's a big statement. He said that today. That's a big statement. He said that strongly. But at the same time, he said, they buy a lot of their oil there, and they'd like to keep doing that. He'd like to see Hormuz Strait opened. I said, well, we didn't stop it. They did it, and then we stopped them. Sort of interesting.
The president suggesting the Chinese leader committed not to, share weapons or munitions with Iran, but suggested that she said he intends to continue purchasing Iranian oil, and no comments about concerns that China may be sharing intelligence with Iran as this conflict continues. Of course, back here in the States, Americans continue to see oil and gas prices and now food prices rise as a result of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian officials in recent days threatening to continue to impose economic pain on Americans due to the ongoing conflict, something we'll certainly continue to be tracking. Del?
Gas prices are now topping $4.53 a gallon. That's much higher, by the way, in places on the West Coast or even here in Washington, D.C. So it's no secret consumers are trying everything to avoid soaring fuel prices, and that includes making those big ticket purchases. There is one item, though, that has seen a spike in interest around the world. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett is live for us in Chicago. Mara, you're specifically looking at those EVs, and higher gas prices are actually pushing more and more Americans toward them.
Yeah, Del, and we're seeing that in the data. almost immediately, and it's because of what you just pointed out. Consumers are feeling this pressure at the pump, and some of them are asking whether switching to an electric vehicle could ultimately save them money long term, especially when we have no clarity about when the conflict in Iran could ramp down and how long that'll then take for gas prices to jump back to normal. Many industry analysts that I've spoken to have said that it could go on for at least another year in terms of these high gas prices. Looking at cars.com data, they say that searches for EVs jumped about 25% last month, with many shoppers saying that this is the first time that they're considering an electric vehicle, and that interest appears to be translating into some momentum globally. We saw EV sales jump 66% in March compared to just the month prior. Overall, looking at the state in April, it was up, the interest was up 6% from a year ago. All of this is according to new data from Benchmark Mineral Intelligence. But it gets a little complicated because while we're seeing these global EV sales rising, much of that is being driven by European purchasers. Now, here in North America, EV sales were actually down 9% in April compared to last year, but there are signs of renewed momentum. March actually saw the strongest monthly total for new EV registrations since the EV tax credit ended last fall, and so Americans do seem interested, especially as these gas prices are rising. But when we're talking about these big ticket items, a lot of buyers are still kind of grappling with that upfront cost because electric vehicles are more expensive, you know, at the onset, and then tend to pay out a little bit after you have them for several years. So that's the thing that buyers are grappling with right now, Del.
Mara, you pointed out that America's picture looks a lot different than the global picture. I just got back from Europe. I can tell you EVs are everywhere. How much does the Trump administration's decision to roll back those EV tax credits play into this last fall?
It's definitely a major factor, and industry analysts say that one of the biggest reasons that U.S. EV sales are lagging behind Europe and other global markets is because of many of the financial incentives that helped offset the higher upfront cost of electric vehicles are just no longer available. And remember, that federal tax credit helped bring down the purchase price for consumers nearly $7,000, and without it, the affordability becomes a much bigger hurdle, even if drivers could save money over time on gas and maintenance. It's actually interesting. I was looking at an estimate from Kelley Blue Book earlier today, and looking at the average U.S. household electricity prices, they're estimating that if you have an electric vehicle, you would be spending about $60 a month charging your vehicle at home. And I don't know about you, but I paid about that, I think it was $68 this morning just to fill up my car, and I'm going to have to fill it up again in a week or two, right? And so the elimination of the tax credit in tandem with bringing down that affordability factor, it also majorly disincentivized companies that were producing EVs. We saw a lot of companies like Ford, for example, switch and ramp up their EV production during the Biden administration, but now they've flip-flopped. They've reduced their output. A lot of companies switching back to ramping up their gas car production. And so now we're in this place that even if American consumers are more interested or looking for more options when it comes to EVs, there's less product on the market for them to consider. And there's a little bit of restrictions in terms of what types of vehicles can be sold in America versus the types of electric cars that you're seeing over in Europe or even over in China. And so that is something that is definitely impacting Americans' decisions here while they're grappling with these high gas prices, Del.
Yeah, my family has an EV and a gas guzzler. I can tell you right now, the EV is winning. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett live for us in Denver. Mara, thank you very much.
We will have much more of today's news coming right up on Today's It Happened. Thanks for joining us again on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. I'm here with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
Joe, thank you. Jake Warner is the director of the East Asia program at the Quincy Institute. Jake, thanks for being with us. So far, your biggest takeaway from the summit?
Sorry about that. Yeah, just how well it seems to have gone. There was a lot of sort of mutual respect expressed by both sides. That is not necessarily where the relationship has been over the last few years, going all the way back to Trump's first term. So the fact that Trump is interested in building a stable relationship, and that's the main thing that Xi Jinping is seeking, is stability in the relationship, They both seem agreed on that, and I think that's a big accomplishment all on its own, given how bad the relationship has been going back to 2018.
Jake, the language about Taiwan is not unusual, but what is unusual is how quickly it was brought up in the opening remarks by Xi Jinping. Is Taiwan on the table?
No, I don't think so. But the Chinese side did feel like they didn't push the United States hard enough at the last meeting between Xi and Trump, which was at the end of October last year. And then subsequent to that, the United States completed a large arms sale to Taiwan, the largest on record, in fact. And so this time, the Chinese side just wanted to plant their flag in the ground and make it clear to the U.S. that Taiwan is still the most important issue in the bilateral relationship. And they don't want the United States sort of destabilizing that issue. But I also think that China understands the United States is not going to sell out Taiwan, is not going to sort of turn it over to China, and is willing to tolerate that. It's really the stability that's the main thing for the Chinese leadership. They want to avoid the kind of escalation we saw that almost took down the global economy last year between the U.S. and China.
Jake, how should the average American view this summit when you have the titans of industry front and center? After all, this is the same China that President Trump once accused of ripping off American industry, saying that they were going after our intellectual secrets and ripping off each and every American industry from the automakers to big tech.
Yeah, we've been on a real roller coaster ride over the last 10 years in between the U.S. and China. And it may be that we're getting to a place that can calm that out. If China understands that the United States has these ways that it needs to protect itself, these ways that the United States needs to invest in its industrial economy, in building up its own technology and protecting its own workers, if China can understand that, and if the United States can understand that China also has these concerns, China has been targeted for economic war, a range of different forms of economic warfare by the United States over the last decade, including cutting it off from advanced technology. If the United States can understand that is very threatening to China, if the two sides can kind of appreciate the needs on each side, then there might be an opening to work towards something that works a little bit better for both sides. It's been hard for the two sides to see from each other's perspectives. But we might be getting closer to something like that.
Jake, I'm curious, as you go back to Kissinger visiting China, you look at Tiananmen Square, you look at all of the other summits in years past, does this summit represent the new business reality that we are no longer nations separated by trade barriers, but instead more closely united by business interest?
I wouldn't go that far because, in fact, the interests of business are not always aligned with the interests of everyday people. We know that well in the United States. It's true in China as well. A lot of businesses in China are doing quite well right now, and the average person is not necessarily. Is having a hard time finding a job, or if they have a job, the competitive pressures are so intense that they feel like giving up. And things like education and healthcare are unaffordable in China, just like in the United States. So we actually do have a lot of commonalities between the two countries. The question is how we can coordinate the interests of business so that business remains healthy, but that does so in a way that works for everyday people too. I'm not sure that Trump has found the answer to that. I'm not sure that Xi Jinping has found the answer to that. But I do know that avoiding conflict in the relationship between the two superpowers, that conflict between the U.S. and China is the one sure path to upend the whole world for everybody. So that would wreck the interests of business and regular people alike. And that's the grounds on which I think we need to explore new forms of economic relations that can work for everybody, not just for high-power businessmen.
Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us here on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a Jim Dandy Thursday night.